In July of 2021, the elite titans of the automotive universe sat in stunned silence. The multi-billion-dollar Volkswagen Group, the undisputed industrial giant that controls Porsche, Audi, and Lamborghini, officially handed over the keys of its most prestigious, sacred crown jewel, Bugatti, to a 33-year-old outsider from Croatia named Mate Rimac. Not an executive with an Ivy League pedigree, not a European auto dynasty heir, but a self-taught mechanic who started just 12 years earlier in a freezing garage with an exploded, rusted sedan. And absolutely zero capital. How does a kid with no connections, from a country that produced literally zero cars, take over the world's most legendary hypercar empire? To understand how this impossible power shift happened, you cannot look at boardroom politics. You have to travel backward in time, peeling away the shiny corporate prestige, until you reach the terrifying reality of a cold, empty warehouse in 2011, where 5 young men were about to run out of food. Back then, Mate Rimac was an unknown 23-year-old living through a founder's absolute worst nightmare. He had just unveiled an audacious electric prototype called the Concept One at the Frankfurt Motor Show. The car was stunning, silent, and violently fast. A consortium of wealthy Middle Eastern investors had seen it, fallen in love with the vision, and offered him a signed term sheet for millions of dollars in cash. For a young founder who was drowning in unpaid bills, it felt like winning the lottery. Then came the knife in the back. Right before the final transfer of funds, the investors issued a brutal ultimatum. Mate had to shut down all operations in Croatia immediately, fire his local team, and move every single blueprint, tool, and patent to their country. Mate stood in an empty office, looking at his small group of engineers who had worked for months without pay, surviving on coffee and blind faith. If he refused the deal, his company would be bankrupt within 72 hours. He would lose everything he had spent his young life building. But if he signed, he would sell his soul and abandon the people who trusted him. He looked at the investors, tore up the contract, and walked out the door. The money evaporated. The next morning, the utility companies cut the power to his workshop. Suppliers were threatening lawsuits. The banks refused to lend him a single euro. Most founders would have declared bankruptcy and walked away. But Mate Rimac possessed a psychological trait that separated him from thousands of failed entrepreneurs. He did not view engineering as a career. He viewed it as oxygen. And in that moment of absolute financial starvation, he stumbled upon a hidden economic reality that the rest of the automotive world had completely overlooked. Mate realized that trying to manufacture and sell finished hypercars to wealthy retail customers was a cash-burning trap. Building a car requires crash tests, tooling, global distribution, and endless regulatory approvals. It takes billions. But what if the real treasure was not the car itself? What if the goldmine was the invisible technology hidden underneath the carbon fiber? While legacy automotive giants like Mercedes, BMW, and Ferrari were spending billions trying to figure out how to cool high-voltage lithium batteries and write complex torque vectoring software. A 23-year-old in Croatia had already solved those exact physics equations with his bare hands. Mate made a radical strategic pivot. Rimac would secretly become the elite engineering laboratory for his own competitors. He began picking up the phone, calling high-end luxury automakers who were desperately falling behind on the electric revolution. When Aston Martin needed an impossibly light, high-output battery pack for their flagship Valkyrie hypercar, they realized their own engineering teams were years away from solving the thermal limits. They knocked on Mate's door. When Christian von Koenigsegg needed an ultra-dense battery system for the hybrid Regura, he did not call Bosch or Continental. He called Mate Rimac. Suddenly, cash started pouring directly into the Croatian garage. This was the dual-engine business model that transformed Rimac automobily. High margin, enterprise B2B engineering contracts funded the expensive research and development for their own Halo cars, without Mate ever having to give away controlling equity in his company to predatory venture capitalists. He was making his rivals pay for his own technological evolution. Yet, how did a young man from Croatia, possess such advanced electrical engineering knowledge in the first place? To see the root of that genius, you have to rewind even further. To a dusty drag strip in 2009. Mate was 19 years old, sitting inside a rusted, heavily modified 1984 BMW E30 that he bought with his teenage savings. He loved drifting, loved the raw mechanical scream of gasoline engines. But during one intense race, the gas engine blew apart in a violent cloud of smoke and shattered metal. For a broke teenager, that blown engine was a financial tragedy. But for Mate, it triggered a wild obsession. He had read everything he could find about the brilliant Serbian-American inventor Nikola Tesla. Mate asked himself a contrarian question that sounded completely insane to the motorsport community. Why are we still using internal combustion engines, which waste 60% of their energy as useless heat, when an electric motor offers instant maximum torque from 0 RPM? At that time, electric cars were seen as slow, ugly, plastic golf carts meant for environmentalists. Nobody in the motorsport world took them seriously. Mate went to an industrial supply yard, bought a cheap, used electric motor from an old forklift, and dragged it into his parents' garage. He had no manuals, no blueprints, no internet forums explaining high-voltage conversions. He spent 18 hours a day soldering circuit boards on his bedroom carpet until his fingers blistered. His first attempts were deeply humiliating. He would bring the silent green BMW to local races, and the car would run for 20 seconds before catching fire, blowing fuses, or stalling in front of thousands of spectators. Veteran mechanics pointed at him and laughed openly. They called his beloved BMW a glorified washing machine on wheels. The public mockery was unbearable, but every time his car broke, Mate did not feel defeated. He felt enlightened. He took the car apart piece by piece. He realized the components he bought off the shelf were fundamentally flawed. If he wanted real performance, he could not buy parts. He had to invent them from absolute scratch. He designed his own custom digital inverters. He engineered an advanced cooling system where individual battery cells were submerged directly in specialized fluid to prevent overheating under extreme loads. In 2011, Mate brought that exact same green BMW back to the drag strip. The mocking stopped instantly. The silent green monster rocketed down the asphalt with such violent acceleration that it obliterated 5 official FIA world records, becoming the fastest accelerating electric vehicle on planet Earth. The boy whom everyone had ridiculed had beaten the multi-billion-dollar car industry from a private garage. Yet, technical brilliance alone does not guarantee business survival. Even with world records and growing B2B contracts, Rimac was still a fragile operation, walking a razor-thin tightrope between glory and total catastrophe. And in 2017, that tightrope snapped on a terrifying mountain road in Switzerland. Television star Richard Hammond was driving the Rimac Concept One for the global hit Show the Grand Tour. In front of rolling cameras, approaching a sharp bend at massive speed, the car lost grip, flew off the edge of the hill, tumbled hundreds of feet down a steep ravine, and erupted into a massive, multi-day fire. The footage went viral across the entire planet. Global headlines questioned whether electric hypercars were death traps. For a tiny boutique company that had only built 8 production cars, a disaster of this scale is usually an instant death sentence. If customers lost faith in safety, the company was finished. Mate did not run to public relations spin doctors. He did something that shocked the industry: absolute radical transparency. He pulled the raw telemetry data from the car's computers and released it publicly. He showed that despite tumbling hundreds of feet down a mountain at race speeds, the car's carbon fiber monocoque cabin remained entirely intact, allowing the driver to crawl out with only a fractured knee before the fire started. Mate proved that his safety architecture had survived an accident that would have crushed an ordinary metal supercar. Instead of destroying Rimac, the incident proved to the world that Mate's carbon fiber engineering was among the safest on Earth. The ultimate validation came shortly after. In 2018, the executives at Porsche knocked on his door. They did not come to buy him out. They came to invest tens of millions of euros to secure a minority partnership, followed closely by major capital injections from Hyundai and Kia. The garage outsider had become an indispensable pillar of the global automotive supply chain. With financial stability finally secured, Mate was ready to unleash his magnum opus, the Rimac Nevera. Named after a sudden, mighty Mediterranean storm, the Nevera was designed to completely obliterate every performance benchmark in human history. 4 bespoke electric motors, one at each individual wheel. Nearly 2,000 horsepower. 0 to 60 miles per hour in 1.74 seconds. On a single, historic day at an automotive testing track in Papenburg, Germany, the Nevera stepped onto the tarmac and broke 23 performance world records in 24 hours. It shattered the 0 to 400 km/h and back to zero record, outbraking and out-accelerating every multi-million-dollar machine built by Ferrari, McLaren, and Koenigsegg. The debate was officially over. Internal combustion had reached its physical ceiling, and a Croatian upstart had written the future. Which brings us back to that monumental day in 2021 when the Volkswagen Group made its historic announcement. Bugatti had spent over a century building the ultimate, roaring 16-cylinder internal combustion engines. But as the world shifted toward high-performance electrification, Bugatti's leadership faced an existential wall. They had the brand prestige, but they lacked the cutting-edge electric speed and high-voltage battery architecture to survive the next century. Volkswagen looked across their vast global empire of engineers and executives and realized that the only person capable of saving Bugatti was the very same man who started by converting a broken BMW with forklift parts. They merged Bugatti with Rimac Automobili, making Mate Rimac the CEO of the newly formed Bugatti Rimac. Think about the sheer poetic weight of that transformation. The kid whose father struggled through the chaotic aftermath of the Yugoslavian War, who grew up in a country with zero automotive pedigree, who was ridiculed at local drift tracks and almost pushed into bankruptcy by greedy investors, was now sitting at the head of the table, commanding the most prestigious luxury badge in human history. Mate Rimac did not conquer the automotive world by following the rules of legacy manufacturing. He conquered it because when his engine blew apart, he did not look for an easy replacement. He looked for a new paradigm. He turned his geographic isolation into creative self-reliance, and his worst financial struggles into a brilliant business model that forced the giants of the world to bow to his terms. The greatest entrepreneurial empires are never built on smooth, comfortable roads. They are born in the terrifying uncertainty of a broken garage, powered by the unyielding belief that what the world calls impossible is simply a problem that hasn't been engineered yet.